The winds off the Connecticut River carried the smell of salt and ambition. In the small port town of Norwich, 1741, a boy named Benedict Arnold stood barefoot on the dock, staring at the ships that vanished into the horizon. They weren't just vessels of trade to him, they were symbols of freedom, power, and destiny. His father, once a respected merchant, had fallen into ruin and drink. The family's name, once proud, became whispered with pity. But young Benedict burned with something his father had lost, a fire that refused to die. He grew strong, sharp, and fearless. By 17, he was apprenticed in a pharmacy, yet his heart was far from shelves and powders. What he wanted was action, glory, and recognition. When he finally opened his own trading business, his ships cut across the Caribbean and Canada, and though he made enemies, he earned one thing he valued more than gold: respect through daring. When the first shots of the Revolution echoed at Lexington and Concord, Arnold was already a successful merchant, but the call to arms was louder than any prophet. He rode through the streets, rallying men with his booming voice. "The time has come to fight for the liberty of this land." In his eyes burned the conviction of a man who believed destiny had chosen him. He marched to Cambridge and presented himself before the Massachusetts Committee of Safety. Confident and bold, he offered his own funds to raise a company of soldiers. They saw in him not just enthusiasm, but command. Arnold wasn't a man born to follow. By the time the first months of the Revolution were underway, Arnold had already planned one of the boldest strikes in early American history, the capture of Fort Ticonderoga. It was a vital stronghold, guarding the gateway to Canada and brimming with British cannons the Patriots desperately needed. Arnold teamed up, reluctantly, with Ethan Allen and the Green Mountain Boys, men who matched his courage but not his discipline. Together, they marched under moonlight, crossed Lake Champlain, and at dawn, stormed the fort. No shots were fired. No blood was shed. Arnold stood before the startled British commander and thundered, "In the name of the great Jehovah and the Continental Congress, surrender!" And the fort fell. Those cannons would later roar at Boston, driving the British from the city. America hailed Ethan Allen as a hero, but behind the glory, Arnold simmered. He had planned, led, and risked all, yet it was another man's name in the headlines. For now, he swallowed the injustice. He told himself there would be other victories, and they would not forget him then. As he watched the flag rise above Fort Ticonderoga, the morning sun glinting on the iron of the cannons, Benedict Arnold stood tall, a handsome, broad-shouldered commander, proud and unshaken. In that moment, he was everything he had ever wanted to be, a hero of the Revolution. But the higher a man climbs on the ladder of glory, the longer his shadow becomes. And in Benedict Arnold's heart, a shadow had already begun to stir. The Revolution was young, and so was its hope. The ragtag Continental Army was still more dream than force. Farmers with muskets, merchants turned soldiers, patriots fueled by faith rather than supplies. But in that fragile chaos, one man burned brighter than most: Benedict Arnold, the daring commander whose courage turned fear into fury. It began with Quebec, 1775. Arnold volunteered for a mission that many called suicidal, to lead a detachment through the uncharted wilderness of Maine, across frozen rivers and deadly swamps, to attack the fortress city of Quebec from the rear, in the dead of winter. He had only 1,100 men, and half would never reach the city. For weeks they trudged through icy rivers up to their waists, dragging boats and supplies through endless storms. Hunger clawed at their bellies, frostbite ate their feet, and still Arnold marched, gaunt, soaked, yet unbroken. He refused to turn back. He told his men, "Better to die in the snow for freedom than live in chains under a king." By December, they reached Quebec, starving, ragged, and outnumbered. There, they joined General Montgomery's force for the fateful assault. In the storming blizzard of New Year's Eve, 1775, Arnold led from the front. A musket ball ripped through his leg, but he refused to fall. Propped against a wall, bleeding into the snow, he shouted orders, urging his men forward even as Montgomery was struck dead beside him. The attack failed. Hundreds were captured. But even the British officer who met Arnold later said, "He fought like a lion." His bravery was beyond dispute. That reputation became his armor. When he finally returned to camp, limping and pale, Washington himself recognized his spirit. Arnold was promoted, and with that, his legend grew. He became known as the boldest blade in the army. The British planned to cut the colonies in half through the Hudson and Lake Champlain. If they succeeded, the revolution would die. Arnold, despite still wounded, took command of a small fleet, barely a handful of ships, against the might of the Royal Navy. He built his own fleet from scratch in the wilderness, hammering and sawing beside his men. When the British advanced, his makeshift navy met them at Valcour Island, a desperate, thunderous clash on cold waters. The Americans were outgunned and outnumbered, but Arnold refused to retreat. His ships burned, his decks splintered, yet he fought on, steering his own vessel through smoke and fire. When the last mast fell, he ordered the remnants of his fleet scuttled, denying victory to the enemy, and escaped through the fog to fight another day. That stand delayed the British invasion long enough for winter to close in, saving the northern colonies. It was one of the most heroic naval defenses in early American history. Even the British admiral called him a man of magnificent courage. Yet the Congress, safe in Philadelphia, gave him no thanks. Promotion went to men who had never smelled gunpowder. Arnold's name was left off the lists. His pride, that fierce, unbending pride, began to ache. He wrote to Congress, not for reward, but for acknowledgment. Silence. He had lost friends, ships, and blood, yet they acted as if he had done nothing. To his officers, he smiled. To his men, he said, "We fight for liberty, not applause." But deep inside, a voice whispered, "They use you, then forget you." The war turned again. The British under General Burgoyne were marching south from Canada, and the fate of the revolution would rest at Saratoga. Arnold was there, second in command under General Horatio Gates, a man of politics rather than passion. Gates wanted caution. Arnold demanded action. He saw the enemy's weakness and begged to strike. Gates refused. Tempers flared. Words were exchanged that history would never forget. Arnold, furious, shouted, "You may command here, sir, but I will command in battle." Denied formal authority, Arnold still rode to the front lines when the British attacked. He galloped through the cannon smoke like a man possessed, sword flashing, voice thundering over the chaos. He rallied broken regiments, led bayonet charges himself, and stormed redoubts under fire. A musket ball tore into his left leg again, the same one wounded at Quebec, and shattered the bone. He fell from his horse, screaming, "Advance! Push on, my brave boys! Saratoga shall be ours." It was. The British surrendered, the turning point of the revolution. While Arnold lay bleeding, half dead, the camp roared in victory. But when the official reports were written, his name was missing again. Gates claimed the glory. Congress congratulated him. Arnold received nothing but another scar. For the second time, he had shed his blood for liberty, and for the second time, the nation turned its face away. As his leg healed in a cast of bitterness, Arnold whispered to a friend, "I have fought for my country, but my country does not fight for me." In those words, the fire that had once burned for freedom began to twist into something darker. The hero of Quebec, the Lion of Saratoga, Benedict Arnold had conquered every battlefield but one. The war within his own heart. Winter had settled like a ghost over Philadelphia. The Revolution had survived its darkest years, but its heroes were growing weary, and none more so than General Benedict Arnold. His leg, shattered at Saratoga, had left him with a limp and a cane. Every step reminded him of the price he had paid for a country that now seemed to have forgotten him. Congress still refused him his due. His seniority had been bypassed, his pay delayed, and his reputation whispered against by lesser men jealous of his fame. He had fought for liberty. Now he found himself fighting for his honor. When Washington appointed him military governor of Philadelphia in 1778, it was meant as recognition. But to Arnold, it felt like exile, command without glory. The city was rich but divided, half still loyal to Britain, half struggling under the weight of war. And in that city of politics and power, Arnold found both temptation and love. Her name was Peggy Shippen, young, beautiful, and refined, the daughter of a prominent Loyalist family. She had grace, charm, and a smile that seemed to thaw the anger in his soul. Arnold was captivated. She was the world he had always admired: elegance, wealth, and recognition. Despite their differences in loyalty, they married in 1779, and for a moment the world seemed right again. But shadows lingered. Peggy's circle included British officers, men like Major John André, cultured, handsome, and dangerously persuasive. Through André, letters began to pass. At first, they were innocent: news, society gossip, polite exchanges. But as months turned, so did the tone. Arnold began to write in cipher. Congress accused him of corruption. Merchants whispered that he had used his position to enrich himself. Trials, inquiries, and slander followed. Though most charges were false, the humiliation was real. He was reprimanded by Washington, gently but firmly. That wound cut deeper than any musket ball. To the world, Washington was the embodiment of virtue. To Arnold, he was once a brother in arms. Now, even he seemed to doubt him. The bitterness curdled into rage. "I have bled for this country," he told Peggy one night, pacing before the fire, "and they repay me with shame. They give power to cowards and praise to fools." Peggy, calm and clever, placed a hand on his arm. "There are men across the lines who would honor your talents. Men who understand your worth." Those words lingered. Her voice became the echo of every injustice he had endured. And somewhere in the ashes of that room, the seed of betrayal took root. By mid-1779, Arnold secretly reached out to the British command through Major André. His proposal was stunning. He would deliver West Point, the key fortress guarding the Hudson River, into British hands, in exchange for money, position, and honor under the Crown. It was the single most ambitious act of treason in American history. For the British, it promised the end of the war. For Arnold, it promised redemption, in his own eyes, if not the world's. He rationalized it as justice. He told himself that the Congress had betrayed him first, that he was only choosing the stronger side, that Washington's war was doomed anyway. But deep down, he knew the truth. This wasn't about loyalty. It was about pride. And pride, once wounded, becomes the sharpest blade. In the late summer of 1780, the plan was ready. Arnold had taken command of West Point, and was secretly weakening its defenses, diverting supplies, and preparing it for British capture. Major André rode north to meet him under disguise. They met under the cover of night, near the Hudson, two men bound by ambition, speaking softly of betrayal as crickets sang in the dark. Arnold handed him detailed plans of the fort and a map of troop positions. Payment and rank were agreed upon. When they parted, André carried in his boot the documents that would have broken the revolution. But fate has a way of catching those who dance too close to fire. André was captured on his return, stopped by American militiamen who found the papers hidden in his boot. When Washington's officers brought the evidence, the truth struck like lightning. Arnold was breakfasting with his officers when a messenger galloped up the hill, pale and frantic. He read the note, and in that moment he knew. The game was over. He fled instantly, mounting his horse and riding for the Hudson. Behind him, cannon smoke drifted over West Point. Before Washington arrived, Benedict Arnold was already aboard a British sloop, sailing downriver, a fugitive and a traitor. Peggy, hysterical and cunning, pretended madness to save herself. Washington, heartbroken, said quietly, "Whom can we trust now?" The revolution trembled, not because of what Arnold had done, but because of what he had once been. A hero. That day, the name Benedict Arnold crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. He had gone from patriot to pariah, from lion to serpent. The world that had ignored him would now never forget him, but for all the wrong reasons. The morning mist hung heavy over the Hudson River, swallowing the cliffs in silence. On one of those cliffs at West Point, a man once hailed as America's bravest stood staring into the fog, his uniform crisp, his eyes hollow. General Benedict Arnold, the Lion of Saratoga, the conqueror of Quebec, was now the architect of treason. Behind him, the fortress slept, unaware that its commander had already sold its soul. Far below, a British sloop named Vulture waited on the water, its sails ghostly white in the dawn. That ship was his salvation, or his damnation. Inside his quarters, his wife Peggy Shippen Arnold sat trembling, her beauty framed by fear. She knew. She had always known. Every whisper, every letter, every coded exchange had led to this moment. Yet even now, she clung to him, not as a traitor, but as a husband desperate for justice. "Benedict," she whispered, "they never deserved you." He looked at her, the woman who had soothed his pride and fed his despair, and for a fleeting heartbeat, doubt crossed his face. But pride crushed it as quickly as it came. "It's too late for doubt," he said quietly. "They wanted a villain. Let them have one." The sound of hoofbeats echoed across the parade ground. A courier arrived, breathless, a letter for Arnold, sealed by Washington's own hand. Arnold tore it open, his face tightening as he read. Major André had been captured. The papers were found. The entire plot had unraveled. For a moment, the world went silent. Then, without a word, Arnold bolted. He mounted his horse and galloped toward the riverbank, the hooves striking sparks from the stones. Behind him, the fortress he had once sworn to defend loomed like a ghost. By the time Washington reached West Point later that day, Arnold was gone, vanished into the mist aboard the Vulture, now under British flag. As the sloop drifted away, he stood on deck, gripping the railing, the wind tearing through his hair. He watched the American shore fade into gray, and though he told himself he felt free, a part of him knew. He was not escaping his enemies. He was escaping himself. While Arnold sailed to safety, Major John André faced the noose. Washington, his heart heavy, refused to spare him. André had been caught as a spy, in disguise, and though his bearing was noble, the law was clear. When André was led to the gallows, he carried himself like a soldier, calm and composed. He said, "I pray you see me not as a traitor, but as a man who died in duty." He was executed on October 2nd, 1780. Even his enemies wept. In London, they mourned him as a martyr. In America, his death became the tragedy that sealed Arnold's infamy. It was André who died, but Arnold's soul was buried that day. In New York, Arnold was welcomed by the British Army with honors, at least on the surface. He was made a brigadier general, paid handsomely, and given command of raids against his former countrymen. But behind the polite smiles, there was unease. Even among his new allies, he was not trusted. Soldiers whispered, "If he betrayed Washington, who will he not betray next?" Arnold tried to silence the whispers with action. He led assaults against Virginia and Connecticut, burning towns, capturing supplies, and striking terror, yet each victory only deepened the emptiness. He rode through flames, but there was no glory left in fire. The British respected his ability, but they never gave him their hearts. To them, he was useful, a weapon, not a brother. He had traded loyalty for power, and now had neither. In 1781, as the war turned against the British, Arnold stood on a bluff overlooking the Chesapeake. News had come. Cornwallis was trapped at Yorktown. Washington and the French had surrounded him. The end was near. Arnold watched the horizon and said nothing. Once that horizon had been his dream, the new nation, the promise of freedom. Now it was only a line he could never cross again. He thought of the men he had led into battle, the cheers of victory, the brotherhood of the camps, and of Washington's steady hand upon his shoulder after Saratoga. And for the first time in years, he felt the burn of shame. That night, he wrote in his journal, "What has honor become? I sought it, and it destroyed me." Peggy followed him into exile, loyal yet haunted. In their London home, she tried to keep the world at bay, hosting dinners, smiling through gossip, pretending they still belonged among the elite. But when the guests left and the candles burned low, she would look at him across the room, the man who had once been America's hope, and see only a shadow. He was restless, sleepless, pacing like a man in a cage. No rank could soothe him, no praise could heal him. He had betrayed his country, but what pained him more was that he had betrayed the man he used to be. Years later, when he walked the streets of London, children pointed and whispered his name, not as a hero, but as a warning. Even the British, who had bought his loyalty, refused to honor him publicly. He had become what he had feared most, forgotten and despised. When asked if he would do it again, he once said bitterly, "I am mistaken if the present generation of Americans are virtuous. They will not remember me kindly." He was right. But what he never understood was that betrayal does not erase greatness, it only darkens its memory. He had been brave, brilliant, and bold, but in the end, his fire consumed everything it touched. The winter of 1801 was cruel in London. The snow fell thick over cobblestone streets, muffling the city's sound, and inside a dimly lit room on Gloucester Place, a man once feared and revered lay motionless on his bed. His name was Benedict Arnold, once America's fiercest sword, now its most despised shadow. Age had withered the fire that once burned in his eyes. His hands, which had once drawn the sword of freedom, trembled with sickness. Around him, the room was silent except for the crackle of dying embers and the sound of his shallow breath. Peggy sat by his bedside, her face pale, her hand clasping his. The world had forgotten him, but she had not. "Benedict," she whispered, "you fought for something once. Do you still believe it mattered?" He stared at the ceiling, his voice barely a murmur. "I fought for honor, Peggy, but I lost my way trying to claim it." Even as his body failed, his mind returned to the battlefields of youth, Quebec, Saratoga, Ridgefield, the moments when muskets roared and he stood tall among brothers. He could still smell the gunpowder, feel the sting of snow, hear the shouts of men calling his name, "General Arnold! Forward!" He remembered his horse collapsing beneath him at Saratoga, the musket ball shattering his leg, the blood soaking into the frozen earth. He had thought it a noble wound then, a scar of honor. Now, it only burned with regret. He closed his eyes and saw George Washington's face, not as an enemy, but as the friend he had betrayed. He saw the calm eyes that had once trusted him completely, and for the first time, tears cut through the years of bitterness. "He was the better man," he whispered. After the war ended, Arnold had tried to find peace in trade and commerce. He sailed to Canada, to the Caribbean, and back to London, but no matter where he went, his name poisoned the air. In America, parents still spoke his name to frighten children. "Don't grow up to be a Benedict Arnold." In England, doors closed behind his back. The aristocracy invited him to dinners, but spoke of him as the man who betrayed his own cause. He was never trusted again, by any flag. Yet, he never begged for forgiveness. Pride was the only armor he had left. But even pride could not keep out the loneliness. In his last days, his mind drifted between two worlds, one of glory, one of guilt. A priest was called to his bedside, a kind man with gentle eyes. Arnold looked up and said softly, "Let me die in the uniform of my first command, not as a general of Britain, but as a soldier of the Continental Army. The priest hesitated, then nodded. Peggy, weeping, brought out the faded blue and buff coat, the one Arnold had worn when he still fought for freedom. They placed it over him. His trembling fingers brushed the fabric, and a faint smile crossed his face. "God forgive me," he whispered. "I meant to serve my country, not destroy it." Moments later, the fire flickered low, and with one long breath, Benedict Arnold's heart fell silent. He was buried quietly in London, under a name few recognized. No great ceremony, no flags, no eulogies, only rain and silence. But across the ocean he had betrayed, his story refused to die. In America, his name became a symbol, not just of betrayal, but of the fine line between ambition and ruin. For in every hero there lives a spark of pride, and if not guarded, that spark can burn the world. Washington had once called him a brave man, sadly misguided. History agreed. For Benedict Arnold was both, the hero who saved America and the traitor who tried to destroy it. His legacy stands like a broken statue, one half shining in glory, the other blackened in shame. And somewhere between the two lies the truth. That no man is born a traitor, but when pride replaces purpose, even the greatest of heroes can fall. Thus ends the saga of Benedict Arnold, the man who rose as a lion, fought like a storm, and fell like a shadow.